The movie follows the story of Suky, a young boy who idolizes his father. A skilled boxer who trains young men at his gym. Despite their modest life, his father is haunted by a recurring nightmare. The only fight he wasn't able to win. Yet, in Suky's eyes, he remains a hero. So much so that he often skips school just to watch his father fight in street matches for money. One day, something unimaginable happens. His father loses. It is the second time Suky has witnessed such a moment, and his confusion grows when he follows his father and sees him collecting money from powerful men who had paid him to lose the fight. Suky didn't understand why his father, who trained him to be upright and honest, would do such a thing. When Suky confronted him after their prayers, his father explained his financial situation, saying that taking care of Suky's school fees and the gym required money. Suky understood his father's predicament, and his father understood Suky's disappointment. So, when his father saw Suky watching him in the next fight, he refused to lose. He won, but this victory would come at a cost. On their way back, they were cornered by the men who had paid him to lose. His father tried to explain and reason with them, but he was restrained. One of the men, named Sledgehammer, who didn't speak Yoruba very well, explained to Suky in English that a man who couldn't keep his words was a dangerous man, and that his father was a dangerous man. He told Suky to keep his word if he wanted to live long, and then he stabbed Suky's father in the neck. Suky watched his father bleed to death right in front of him. As he cried, he took out his frustration on a punching bag. A new feeling washed over him, anger and a promise of revenge on his father's killers. He was then taken in by a lawyer who promised him justice, but after 12 years, that justice was never found. However, the lawyer was close to uncovering the truth. He had found the culprits, a gang known as the Ajay Gang, led by Sledgehammer. In a televised interview, the lawyer promised that within 3 months, they would be arrested and brought to justice. Suky, already exhausted from hearing such promises so many times, left for his room. There, he stared at a picture of him and his father, still holding on to traces of his dad. Even though Suky no longer boxed, he took his fitness seriously, just like his father. He had also inherited nightmares of his own. When he awoke that night and went out to the living room, he found his uncle and his wife terribly beaten and butchered to death. The killer was none other than Sledgehammer, who had come to silence the family, but unaware of Suky's presence there. His men restrained Suky and knocked him unconscious. Suky awoke with the murder weapon in his hand and the screams of police ordering him to drop it. He had been framed for the murder of the lawyer and his wife. Before we continue, Ejo, auntie, uncle, if this video sparks an iota of joy inside, help us tap that like. It's like a quick note of approval. Thank you. And let's get back into it, shall we? Suky was immediately transported to Ajah prison, a prison run by a mad and evil warden named Marshall. Nobody dared to escape. Those who tried were killed in front of the new inmates, letting them know that he was essentially their god, holding their lives in his power. The new inmates were taken into their cells, large crowded rooms with more than a surplus of half-clad men. As the newcomer, Suky had to become the errand boy for Ijaya, a crippled but smart inmate who had been there for more than 10 years. Ijaya put Suky in charge of the illegal pay-to-use phone in the cell. On his first day in prison, he witnessed an illegal fight called Dambe fight, on which the inmates would bet. Ibrahim, a strong but loud man, was the reigning champion who had been dominating these fights for years. Those who faced him often ended up dead, but Suky, determined to remain low-key, tried to stay out of trouble. But soon, he realized there were only 3 ways out of prison: through the marshal, Ibrahim's fist, or suicide. The thing about prison was, even Marshall felt like a prisoner. He harbored political dreams and ambitions that were tied down by this place. Speaking of things being tied down, Marshall had forcibly prevented a doctor named Simisola from leaving. He had a crush on her, but she refused his advances, seeing him as evil and wicked. However, her refusal had cost her her freedom, because if she attempted to leave, his men were ready to shoot. Marshall's bosses were political elites, including a senator. This senator was a friend of the Ajay Gang's overall leader. Yes, that guy. And he was leveraging their friendship. The senator instructed the execution of Suky, the last loose end in their killing affairs. Eager to impress his senator bosses and maybe, just maybe, who knows, whisper sweet political nothings in their ears, Marshal hauled Suky out of prison. His men started the usual beatdown, but Suky surprisingly fought back, taking out 3 masked goons before being subdued again. Marshal, impressed by Suky's rage, had a brilliant idea to buy Suky's freedom, while promising his boss that this would be the last they would hear of Suky. Suky awoke in prison hospital in pain, but that didn't stop him from his routine prayers. And as a man of faith, Suky was admired by Dr. Simisola, although she herself had lost her faith, another thing the prison had taken from her. She told him about the bird in the cage Suky admired, and that she had rescued and treated it when she found it trapped, and now kept for company, or as her prisoner. Their little chat was interrupted by Babanla, the boxing coach, who had come to bring Suky to Marshal. Perceiving a threat, Suky armed himself with scissors, but Simisola's pleas caused him to drop them. He followed Babanla to the gym where Marshal was. Marshal gave him another speech, not too different from the one when he first arrived. He told Suky how he owned his breath and how he had bought his freedom, and then left him for Igimu, who already sensed an enemy. Suky was shown his upgraded bunk in the VIP section of the prison. Life on the other side was different. Unlike the other cells where food was left like dog food for the inmates, on this side, they had canteens and servers, benches, and all Suky had to do was collect his food. All these people and the privileges they received were due to the importance Marshal saw in them, and how he could make money from them. Igimu, still not a Suky fan, demonstrated his alpha status by collecting Suky's soup that had big fish head. Suky, wisely choosing survival over pride, ate plain baked curry, as in eba. Yes, while eating, he overheard that the winner of the Dambe fights gets released, which presumably meant Igimu would be released soon. Suky inquired about details, but Igimu wouldn't give him any, so he sought out Ijaya to train him to fight. But knowing the likely outcome of the fights, Ijaya refused. Suky would need a trainer because Igimu even exempted him from training with Babanla. His lack of skills left him as the punching bag, but his resilience and refusal to quit surprised Simisola. She now saw him as another man devoured by darkness. A woman's approval was the last thing Suky sought. He began to train alone, but mostly did rubbish. Ijaya, seeing his determination, inquired about the story behind his focus, and Suky told him just 2 words: my father. So, Ijaya agreed to train him, from basic punches to different styles of attack. Soon, Suky was throwing punches, even in his sleep. Quite literally. Babanla informed them of a fighting competition coming up in 3 months. They already had Igimu to represent them, but to their shock, Suky requested to join, even though he was ill-prepared. Neither Ijaya nor Babanla could persuade him to sit this one out, so the only way to choose was for him to go against Igimu. You know, sometimes they say the only way out is through. The day was set, and as they began, Igimu had the upper hand, revealing his skill. But soon, his weaknesses began to show. He celebrated too early, and Suky, tapping into his rage, took advantage of the moment, punching him into a coma before Babanla stopped him. Igimu passed away, and as Dr. Simisola cleansed him for burial, Suky, filled with regret, just watched. When she saw him, she yelled at him until he left. A fighter as brutal as Suky was just what Marshal needed, a man with burning rage that could ignite even when tired. Marshal couldn't wait to tell the senator this, and perhaps also share his ambitions. The senator was initially not in approval, since he had instructed Suky's death, but Marshal was able to convince him, pledging that Suky would double their bets. Marshal then brought up the topic of his future, and the senator gave him a non-committal answer, which Marshal, in his infinite optimism, interpreted as a win. On getting back, Simisola, understandably fed up with the constant death, threatened to quit. She made it crystal clear that she would never marry Marshal. Infuriated, Marshal did what any rational, love-struck prison warden will do. He slapped her. Suky and other inmates witnessed this display of affection. Simisola, with no other option, retreated to her room. Suky, in a rare display of concern, asked Ijaya about Simisola. Ijaya filled him in on her backstory, and with his prison wisdom, warned Suky against any funny ideas, because protecting a woman who clearly hates Marshal is a terrible idea in prison. Soon, Marshall introduced them to Suky's first opponent in the competition. A competition attended by dignitaries who lacked a bet, like the senator and his friends. And of course, Suky didn't disappoint, but he sustained a stab wound. He got roughed up a bit, and regrettably, Dr. Simisola had to patch him up. That night, a party was thrown in his honor. There was plenty of food, drinks, and women for the inmates. A testament to Marshall's happiness. But after a while, Suky left to see you-know-who. To his disappointment, Marshall was there, his blooming, unhappy voice echoing from Simisola's room. Marshall's men blocked Suky's entrance, but as resourceful as Suky is, he faked a reopening of his stab wound, and the guards, finally convinced of his medical emergency, let him in. Simisola, touched by this gesture, or maybe just relieved to have a non-Marshall visitor, was grateful. Suky learned about her unfortunate history with Marshall, the tale of misplaced trust that landed her in prison. His next fight was with a Cameroonian, a fight that ended quicker than it started. He went on to fight a series of fights undefeated, and he was 2 fights away from the finals when he spotted Sledgehammer. Rage, like a comforting old friend, flooded back. Revenge consumed him, and Ijaya noticed Suky's emotional instability and advised him to chill out. Revenge, Ijaya assured him, was coming. One day, on Marshall's request, Suky was brought in, and Suky revealed his readiness to fight, but on the condition that Simisola be released. Marshall didn't do hostage negotiations, so he refused. But Suky's demand for the doctor's release was non-negotiable, and Marshall had to come to an agreement with him, as long as he continued to win every fight. Suky began training like a man possessed. Revenge on Sledgehammer, his next opponent, was his only focus. Rage was his fuel, but uncontrolled rage, as everyone knows, can lead to losing. Ijaya and Babanla, in a heartwarming display of tough love, staged an intervention. They insulted him, belittled his father's name. Predictably, Suky lost it. Exactly the point, guys. They helpfully explained that raw power wasn't everything. Intelligence was key. Meanwhile, Marshall met with the senator to discuss the upcoming final fight. Big stakes, big bets. Suky losing would be bad. Marshall, ever the optimist, assured the senator of Suky's victory. This time, the senator was blunt. Marshall, he sneered, was too uneducated for politics. Stick to the prison, the senator advised. Enraged, Marshall drove back, muttering about revenge, while Suky continued his training, focusing mostly on his emotional control, which he was now better at. Marshall sent for him. Here go a plot twist. Marshall now wanted Suky to lose to Sledgehammer. Suky, naturally, refused, even after hearing about Marshall's own revenge plot against the senator. But Marshall wouldn't take no for an answer. He revealed his trump card. He threatened him with Simisola, who he had tied up. Left with no choice, Suky agreed. That night, as the fight between Suky and Sledgehammer started, as anticipated, Sledgehammer began to taunt Suky, but Suky managed his emotions quite well until he couldn't anymore and threw the first punch. The fight began properly, and soon, Sledgehammer had Suky on his back twice. A disappointment for the senator and his associates who had bet heavily on Suky to win, but a sight Marshall relished. What Marshall didn't know was, while the fight was ongoing, Ijaya went back inside the prison and managed to fight with the 2 police guards watching over Dr. Simisola and won, after which he whistled a knowing tune, notifying Suky. They had planned for Suky to concede some beatings until Ijaya was able to free the doctor. Now that she was free, Suky refused to hold back anymore. He unleashed hell. Thunderous blows rained down on Sledgehammer, each punch fueled by years of bottled up and pent-up rage. As he finished Sledgehammer off, he uttered those fateful words: "A man that can keep to his word isn't a man." The Ajay Supreme Leader, shocked by the loss of his warrior, dropped his glass in dramatic slow motion, and embarrassed, he fled. But Suky wasn't done with them yet. He revealed to the senator Marshall's plans for him to lose the fight, an accusation Marshall couldn't explain himself out of. Soon, new inmates were brought in, and Ijaya, the new warden, received them. Marshall was one of the inmates, stripped of all his power and at the mercy of his new cellmates. Ijaya, with a flourish, left Marshall to his fate, and his former inmates surprisingly were not in a forgiving mood. Finally, Dr. Simisola was able to leave the prison, and before she left, she promised to find a good lawyer for Suky. And with her departure, Suky released her caged bird. With that, folks, we reached the end of Suky, a movie that shows us how revenge, though tempting, often traps you in the same cycle of violence you sought to escape. True freedom may lie in breaking that chain, not perpetrating it. See you again.